Hello everyone, this is Joe Rule from Raconteur Animation. Today we're going to take a look at how to create rigging for a chain in Autodesk Maya 2017. And it's a kind of a specific case because this chain only moves in one axis, like so. And it's rotated at a 45-degree angle, and it needs to preserve this curve as it moves. And my goal with creating this rigging was to, in this machine, this object, call it a grabber, slides across this tray and grabs something and pulls back and forth. And so it was most easy for me to animate just this object and then just have the chain follow it, as I will show here. You'll see it preserves this nice curve in the chain. It just moves back and forth. And this was actually for a project for print trace fruit labeling. You can see it. You can see it a little bit in these shots here, this chain moving. You can see it a little bit in this shot, and then it's a small detail in this opening shot as well. See the chain moving. So, how to create this? I'm going to open up this project file that I have set up already that doesn't have any rigging in it. And the first thing that's complicated about this is that the entire joint chain is rotated 45 degrees. This chain is rotated 45 degrees. And I will show you how this is set up. Each of these links are a separate object, and then they're inside of a group that's rotated. Now, if I were to start creating my rigging to drive each of these joints, each of these links, I should say, create joints to drive the links. When I create a joint here, it's going to be oriented up and down. And so if I rotate the joint, there's no axis that's aligned to the way that this chain is oriented. It's just bad rigging technique. So what I'm going to do is rotate this entire chain down flat. It's already rotated 45 degrees. I'll flatten it out. And now when I create all of my joints, they're going to be aligned perfectly with the links in this chain. And I will go ahead and do that. Just use the Create Joints tool. And this first link is fixed. See, the screw holds it down. So I'm just going to start creating on the second link. I can't remember before if I mentioned it before, but be sure to have this point snapping turned on, because at each of the center of these joints there's a vertice that I can snap to, and that ensures that all of these joints will be perfectly centered. Like so. And the second piece for this that we need is a spline, or a curve. And that's actually what's going to drive this entire joint chain, because we need to set it up. Back up a step. There are two types of ways to rig a joint chain in animation. There's forward kinematics and inverse kinematics. Forward kinematics, or FK, means that if I grab, come on, wow, it's broken. If I grab a joint chain and rotate all of them, that's not a very good example. Each joint is driving the one in front of it. So the kinematics move forward, I guess. Inverse kinematics is the opposite of that, which means there's an endpoint, and I can animate that endpoint, and then mathematically all of these other joints will follow certain rules, and all I have to do is animate one thing, and all the rest of it, this takes care of itself. So in order to do that, we need a curve. And I'm just going to hide this joint chain. So I'll click on Joint, Control H, hide it, and I'm going to use Create Curve Tools. And there are two curve tools that are noteworthy here. There's the CV curve tool and the EP curve tool. You are definitely going to want to use the EP curve tool, and I will show you why. If I click on CV, and once again be sure that point snapping is turned on, and I start drawing my curve out here. When I start making around this turn, you'll see that the curve actually does not follow the center points here. It's weighted. So if I use the EP curve tool, I start here, it's going to stay on the center points. And the reason that's important is because once we attach all of these joints to this curve, if that curve is not precisely on the center point of all of these chain links, then the joints are going to move, and it'll ruin the rig. It won't be usable. So back to the start here and create our curve. Oop. There we go. Okay, so we have our joint chain and we have our curve. And the next step is going to be to create the IK drivers so that the joint chain can be driven by moving this curve. And I'm going to select both the joint chain and the curve, and I'm going to drop them inside of our cutter chain group here. And to create the IK setup, I will go back to the skeleton menu here and choose this option for Create IK Spline Handle. And be sure to click the box next to it here. I will click Reset Tool, and there are two settings here that you need to watch out for in this case. This one is Auto Create Curve, and we want to uncheck that because we have already created a curve and we want to use our curve as opposed to letting Maya do its own thing. And the second setting that you want to watch out for is root on curve. And what this means is that this first joint, which is the root of the joint chain, if this setting is checked, this joint will be attached to the curve. And in order to animate this, we're actually going to move this entire curve here. And if if this first joint is attached to the curve, then the entire joint chain is going to move like this. And obviously that wouldn't work at all. So we'll go back to create IK spline handle, be sure both of those settings are unchecked, and then in the bottom left-hand part of the screen you'll see a tooltip for left mouse button to pick Start Joint. So I'm going to click the first joint, self-explanatory, the Start Joint, and then the next instruction is pick End Joint. So I will pick the last joint. The third instruction is to pick the curve to drive the IK spline. Pick our curve, and it creates this IK handle. I will middle mouse click and drag this IK handle into our group along with everything else. And what's going on here? So now all of our joints are attached to the movement of this curve. If I click Control 1 on the keyboard, it's going to click the curve and then click Control 1 on the keyboard. It's going to isolate this curve, and then I can grab some points here. And right now soft select is turned on. If I hold down B on the keyboard and the left mouse drag, I can crank down the soft selection size. Click Control 1 on the keyboard again, and if I move this, our joint chain is moving. Look at that, and it's all attached to this curve, and it's acting a bit like a chain, more or less. But it's the chain itself is obviously not attached to the joint chain. So in this case, all of our chain links are separate objects, so it's going to be easy just to use parenting to put our links inside of the joints and have everything drive properly. So I will shift click on this joint here to open up the complete hierarchy, and this is the first joint, and the first link is actually fixed. It doesn't move, so I'm going to grab the second link and drop it into the first joint, middle click and drag. And then, so I'm going to just go down the whole hierarchy and drop each link into its respective joint. 7 into 6, 8 into 7, 9 into 8, and so on. Okay. Shift click to close that. And now, what happens if we move that curve? Hey, look at that. So we're moving the entire curve. You'll see that this endpoint actually goes through the joint. But because before, when we set up the IK handle, we said not for it to for this root to be attached to the curve, and so it just slides through and the root stays where it is. So as I said in the beginning of this tutorial, my goal with this was to be able to animate this grabber object here, still animated, and just have this chain follow it. Now, the method that we have so far in order to get this nice curve and to get the chain working together, it doesn't connect well to being driven by this grabber object. And I will show you why. This cutter chain object, I'm just going to rotate that 45 degrees. We're all done with the rigging. So we can rotate it back. And now if we move this curve, it's going to do that. So typically, if you want if you want an object to follow another object, you use a parent constraint. So if I select this grabber object and then command or control select the curve and then go to constrain parent, I see it parented the translate options. It's not even close to working because of the way that this is rigged. The chain all of a sudden just shoots way too far off because the curve is not actually stuck onto the joint chain. It's sliding around, and the joints are sliding on the curve. It's kind of a strange setup. But a way to work around that, I'm going to delete this parent. A way to work around that is to use driven keys instead of a parent, because this grabber object just slides back and forth. It's just going from point A to point B and back to point A. It's easy to just set up 2 keyframes and a driven key, and then the Maya will take care of the rest. So how does that work? First, I will select the curve, and the key that we want driven is the TranslateX here. That's the only thing that's going to be animated. So I will go to the attribute editor, right click on the translate, and then set driven key. And it brings up this box here. And we want this key, we want this attribute to be driven by the movement of this grabber object. So I selected that, and I'm going to click load driver, and then this TranslateX option is what we want it to be driven by. So this is at a resting position, the beginning of the animation. I'm just going to set a key there, and then if I move to this is the farthest point that this grabber object is going to go. And then if I grab my curve and just manually put it into position, and then I'm going to click the plus button on the keyboard to make my arrows bigger for more accuracy. And just line that up there. And then click key again. And so that saved those 2 points. And it will interpolate between, whenever this grabber object is moving, it will interpolate between them. But it's still really weird looking. It's not even, it's sort of following it, not really. So to fix that, I will open up the graph editor, and I'm going to click on our curve, and you'll see this attribute here with the little greater than sign. I'll click on that, and at the beginning of the timeline there's going to be a little graph here that represents the driven key, and you'll see it's curved, which means that it doesn't consistently interpolate. It's a weighted interpolation of how these 2 objects relate to each other. But if I want it to be direct, 1-to-1, I can select this curve and then click linear interpolation. You'll see it just moved. And now it sticks right where it's supposed to be. Perfect. And that's literally it. It's a little bit hacky. I would really be curious if there are other people out there who are better riggers than I know of a better technique, who maybe could use actual parenting for more flexibility as opposed to these driven keyframes. and maybe there's a way to better utilize the curve and the IK curve. But this worked well for me, and I hope some of you find it helpful. Please leave questions, comments, criticisms in the comments below, and you can check out more of our work at raconturanimation.com. Get in touch. Let me know if there's anything else in these projects that you're curious about how we did. I'm always glad to share. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you next time.